Okay, so I didn't really know what to call this demo, but I called it Turning Wood Without Torn Grain. So I'm sure everyone knows what torn grain is, but it's not getting a smooth surface, basically when the fibers of the wood are pulling out. And some woods typically do that more than others. A lot of times when you're doing spalted or punky wood, you'll see torn grain, or softer woods are harder to get smooth. Something like hard maple is good to stay away from, or to not get torn grain with, but something like this is pine. At least I think it's pine. It's a 2x4. I'm not exactly sure what exact species of pine it is, something like that. But it's just a 2x4 ripped in half, and then I cut the corners off. Just because pine likes to splinter a lot, I don't want it flying at you guys. But so tonight I'm just going to go through the 4 traditional tools I use most, starting with the spindle roughing gouge, and then going into the spindle gouge and the bowl gouge, and then the skew, kind of in linear, how I've learned them, and just showing you how I achieve simple shapes with each one, so beads, coves, and flats. Talk a little bit about the form of those shapes, but mainly I'm going to talk about tool control and technique, which really just comes from the more time you use these tools. Is you get better at using them with muscle memory and finding the right angle to turn wood at. So the main goal here is to sand less. We want a super smooth finish coming straight off the tool, and since I'm doing that with pine, it should only get easier with every other wood. So if you can do it with this, you should be good. And I won't be able to get it perfectly smooth, and I'll show you some areas I have troubles with, but just gonna go over my technique when it comes to tool control. Yeah, this is good, Bill, if you can get close up. That's pretty good right here, though. Thank you. Okay, so spindle roughing gouge. Everybody probably is familiar with this. Getting it round, the tool is below parallel. I like to use more of the wing of the spindle roughing gouge than the front. So that cut would be classified as more of a scrape. So in wood turning we have scraping and we have shearing. Scraping, as you can see, leaves a pretty terrible finish. All the side grain is torn up. It's not very clean. We need to do what people say rub the bevel is to get a better finish. And typically you're not going to use the spindle roughing gouge to make detail cuts. But when I started and learned wood turning, I only used this tool for like the first 7 or 8 years of wood turning. So I used this thing to make beads, coves, every detail. So what I learned from that is it's important to, when you sharpen this, the tendency is these corners tend to get rounded over and they lose their ability to get finer detail. And so when I do details with this tool, you'll see me turn it over where it's almost completely upside down when I'm rolling a bead, and really taking advantage of the 2 corners. So this isn't too great of information because you'll likely just use a different tool to get details, but I want to motivate you through this demo to try different tools. Some people, only use carbides. That's okay, but I wish everyone would try every tool out and not just get stuck on one thing. So just to show you that this tool can be used to do details too. I'm going to drop my tool rest a little more for this. And when you are forced to use this tool to make details, it'll make it easier to use the right tool to do details with. So rolling a bead, you can see how I kind of plow through with the corner of the tool. So one key element to get a smooth finish is to take to feed the tool slowly into the wood. If you just take a pass and kind of fly through it, that's not going to leave a very smooth finish. But if I take my time and feed the tool into it smoother, it's going to cut more surface and then leave a smoother finish. So you can see the areas I'm trying to make smooth. Over here I went too fast. Over here I took my time and got it nice and smooth. I've got all this wood flying up, but that's what I would fix next now that I have some shape defined. So go very slowly and then come through the other side. You can see how it's almost upside down to get a nice deep detail right there. Okay, and I'll talk more about relief cuts when I use the skew, but I always grew up watching, oh, there's a catch, but that'll happen when you're using the wrong tool. So I grew up watching my dad do a lot of wood carving, and he always used relief cuts in his carving, so you make one cut and then lead your next cut up into that. So what I mean by that, if demonstrating that with a skew, using the long point to make, I guess, an incision or so, you would call it, and then leading up to it from the other side. So that way you don't tear the grain out on the other side. You get a nice smooth finish over here. If you were to just not make the relief cut, and do the cut I did after, you'll tear out the other side. So relief cuts are really important in wood turning, especially spindle turning. But I'm just going to continue to use the spindle roughing gouge for now. So you can rub the bevel with the middle of the tool as well to get a smooth finish. Going nice and slow. My tools are sharp, so that's really important for turning pine, especially. You'll get, the more you do wood turning, you'll get better at making compound cuts. So what I mean by that is starting a cut with the tool or the flute, which is the middle open area of the tool, that's the flute. Starting it with one angle and completely transitioning throughout the entirety of the cut. So when I start at the top here and rotating the flute kind of equally as I follow down into the cut. You do that sometimes more than other times. So like at the top here, I was trying to get a nice deep angle in there. So I rotated from this side all the way down into it at the bottom. Okay. So that's enough spindle roughing gouge. I know we're not usually using that to get clean surfaces, and I didn't because it's not the right tool for the job. But try to clean this up a little bit better right here. Okay. So with that, I just want to let you know, I think sometimes people think of this negatively because it's called a spindle roughing gouge, but you really can use it to get fine details and smooth surfaces. In some instances, this tool is better than smaller fine detail gouges to get a smooth surface on, especially with when you're working in bigger diameters. It can help a lot. Okay, so I'm just gonna switch out my piece of wood.
Tyler,
Yeah.
how much pressure do you put on the bevel when you're turning?
With that tool specifically,
Yes.
or all tools?
All of yes.
Well, it kind of depends. I'm always putting probably double the pressure I am on the bevel as I am to putting pressure downwards to the tool rest. Always more pressure downwards and pinching the tool harder than I am pushing into the wood. So a lot of the force gets focused, pinched, and pressed down than it is pushing on the wood.
That's how I learned to do my pins. I do pins with those.
With the spindle roughing gouge, yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good tool to learn on for sure, to start, yeah. I don't. I know some people think I think it would be beneficial for me to switch hands. I've always learned with my left hand forward, right hand back. With spindle turning in specific, I've never seen it necessary for me. With bowl turning, I think I would benefit if I learned to do the push cut with my right hand forward. And I can, but not as good as I can with my left hand guiding me in the front. But spindle turning, I don't completely think it's beneficial to go both ways, especially smaller spindle turning. But when you get in larger diameters, there's so many more variables, and don't do that. Don't press. All right, well, I'll pass this part around. I broke it in half. Pine isn't the most friendly wood to turn, but it's great to practice on. This is all just 2x4 ripped in half, so if you want a cheap way to practice your wood turning skills, this is a good way to do it. Okay, so now I'm going to move into my spindle gouge and my detail gouge. I'm just holding this piece of wood in a small size one-way chuck and live center. I was afraid if I use a drive center, the soft pine would kind of rip out and not have enough drive to it.
How much time do you spend turning a week?
A week? Well, it depends the time of year. Right now, not as much as I was in the winter, but today I turned all day. Probably when I'm in full, like on production mode, I'm turning like Monday through Wednesday, probably 8 to 10 hours a day. And then the next 4 days, maybe only a few hours a day. So just go hard for a few days, and then it all depends on my schedule too. But right now, probably only 20, 30 hours right now. So spindle gouge and bowl gouge, I always kind of go back and forth on what I'm using more and what tools I use more at once. Sometimes I'm using a lot of skew. Sometimes I'm feeling gouges. I don't know exactly what it is. But these are the two I use the most in terms of spindle gouge and bowl gouge. I think they're both 1/2 inch size. They look really similar. The only difference in these tools really is the depth of the flute. So on the bowl gouge, the flute is deeper. Couldn't tell you by how much, and then you sharpen them slightly differently. I sharpen all my tools freehand with the platform. I don't have anything against jigs. Some people do, but I think jigs are just as good. But I just do it that way because when I'm sharpening here or at my house or at my dad's shop, all I need is a grinder and a platform. I don't need jigs and measurements and all that. So I can do it just as fast on a platform. Some people say you can't achieve the same grind with a jig as you can with the platform freehand. I haven't found that to be my case, but I've just found that the best way I can do it is on the platform, the most repeatable and the fastest. Okay, so gouges. I would pick a bowl gouge over a spindle gouge if I was knocking corners off trying to get it round, and I'd focus more on the wing of the tool than the tip. Okay, so that's a scrape, kind of like with the spindle roughing gouge. It's not going to leave as good of a surface as a shear. So what I think about the bowl gouge when you're doing it on spindle turning and the spindle gouge is people always discount the wings usually. They're more tip oriented than they should be. And I think you need to learn how to do shearing with the wing of the tool. And not just the top of the wing, you need to use the whole wing. And this cut is sometimes easier to achieve than planing with the skew, and it can give you just as good and smooth results. So you're going to drop the bottom of the handle quite severely for this. You might even want to drop your tool rest. And you're just going to take a nice small amount of wood away and go very slowly. So at the end there, I got too much of a cut, but I'll come back and pick it up. So using a cut like that, that's very helpful on the outside of a bowl. I'll show you that in a second when I do a bowl. But that leaves a super smooth finish, and it's another tool or another cut to have in your tool belt. I think that you should learn many different cuts to achieve the same surface. So you could do that with a skew, you could do that with this. And there's other ways to do it too, such as spindle gouge. But sometimes each piece of wood is so different that you're going to need to be able to try to cut it different ways. So sometimes it's not going to like this certain way, so you got to try something else. And it's all about getting that smooth surface so I don't have to spend a bunch of time sanding. So just to show you that with a spindle gouge, the wing is a little shorter, but you can do the same thing pretty much. You can see there the tip of the tool is pretty much not even engaged. And that will leave you a super smooth finish. I'm not going to pass it out right now, but you would barely have to sand that. And people do like to say, you know, that surface you barely even have to sand. But I always feel I like to sand no matter what to remove tool marks. And I typically sand more in like the 220s than I do in the higher grits, but it's all personal preference there too. Okay, so I was working on flat areas there. Now we're going to move more into beads and coves. So with a spindle gouge, how I would turn a bead, there's two different kinds of beads. You can do a raised bead. That would be like the chalice with the balls there. The raised bead in the middle at the bottom of the chalice, that is a raised bead. A sunken bead is more in the same plane of surface as you're cutting. That raised bead is protruding from the sides around it, so it's a raised bead. A sunken in bead, I would make my 2 relief cuts on the sides with the spindle gouge, and then I would work from the middle down on each side to roll the bead. And like I said before, this is also a compound cut, so you need to become familiar with changing the angle of the flute through the cut. Come in from the sides now. Okay, so it's still a raised bead even though I kind of brought the sides down, or sorry, it's a sunken in bead even though I brought the sides down, because this surface is the same height as the bead. So doing a raised bead with the spindle gouge. Just going to clean this up a little bit, try to go slower and focus on what I'm doing. Raised beads start the same way. Make my relief cuts, maybe make them a little deeper this time. And then I'm going to work the sides down. And my relief cuts made it so it doesn't tear out my bead, which it might have done. Let's see. A little bit, but we can turn that away. So work to the other side now. And then we roll the bead. Okay, so I just cleaned up the bottom corners of it, and because of that I'm going to come back from the far side on both sides to clean it up. Okay, so that would be a raised bead. I'm just going to draw that out on here just so you get a little bit better idea. Hopefully everybody can see this. So we want the two sides to be even. We don't want one lower than the other. We want the bead to start at the bottom going straight up, and then the top of the bead to be nice and symmetrical. We don't want the sides or the bottoms of the bead here to taper out. We want them nice and straight. That's what's going to make that very crisp, is almost a right angle right here. You can do a bead on say like the outside of a bowl, something that is curved, not flat like I'm doing here. But you're still going to want the sides to line up, to be in the same plane. You don't want one lower and one higher. So put them in the same plane, same principles. The bead goes straight up from the bottom and then symmetrically down from the top. And then you can do multiple, in one area with the same principles, something like that. So now talking about a cove. If anybody knows who Steve Jones is, he's probably the best production wood turner in the world. He's from England somewhere. Look up his Instagram or YouTube. His name is Steve Jones. He has really good information. But he just did a video on how to turn a cove cleanly with a spindle gouge. But just talking about the shape of a cove here. Can everybody see this pretty good? Okay. So when I do a cove, similar thing. I want the sides of it leading up to it. I want that to be on the same plane. I don't want one lower than the other. You can add a shoulder to it, which is what we'll do. So this here, it's basically a reverse bead. We want it to going straight down, almost 90 degrees. Just kind of half in there. We want it straight. And then the bottom, the center is at the very bottom, and the sides are nice and symmetrical. And I use a gouge to do that. You can use a skew, but it's like super difficult. So I would recommend using a gouge, and I'll go through the technique I use to do that now. Any questions on the shape or form?
Do you always have a fingernail grind on all your gouges?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't exactly know what other options there are versus a fingernail grind, or what other, do you know any other options for a spindle gouge? What kind of grind there is, I think.
It's just sort of
Okay, so there is the Irish grind, yeah, the traditional grind, and that, you see that on, it's called different things sometimes. You know, a bottom feeder bowl gouge is an Irish grind. A continental spindle gouge has an Irish grind in it, and usually that's achieved by just putting the tool in the like the V-rest of a Wolverine jig and just rotating it back and forth. So it's less kind of compound with the jigs. It's more just, I sharpened like that a long time, but
sort of like your rough and gouge.
right, like your roughing gouge. I sharpened my spindle gouges like that for a long time, and that works not as good, I would say, as a fingernail grind. I would stick to fingernail grinds. All right, so let's lay out a cove. I'm going to do it in this section, but first I'm going to get from here to here, nice and flat, planing with the wing of the tool. Not sure where that sound's coming from. Let's see if I can fix that. I don't know what that's from. Something's squeaking. Okay, there. So now, to kind of rough out my cove, I'm going to use the tip of the spindle gouge. And at first here, I'm not worried about making a smooth surface. I just kind of want to get the shape roughed out. And I'm working downhill from top to bottom. Okay, now I've got a little more definition. I'm going to start to use the tip and the wing and rotating as I go down, starting with the flute closed and opening it as I go down. Okay, now I'm going to define my shoulders on each side of the cove here. So this is all tip now, all tip of the spindle gouge. I want those shoulders nice and flat, 90 degrees. So looking at the horizon, top view here, I always think it's super important, you know, to watch the horizon. Some people even say, as you're turning, that's where you should be looking. I don't personally do that. I'm looking at where the tool is cutting and then kind of simultaneously watching the horizon too to see if I like the shape. Okay, so I've got shoulders established. One's lower than the other, so now I got to go back and fix that. And they're not completely straight, so. Okay, shoulders are good. Now I need a little more attention on the middle. I'm going to switch to my bowl gouge and use the wing, kind of like I was planing before. Just like that, but I'm going to start with the wing. Tool is almost curved, so the flute is fully not showing. Starting with the wing and then kind of lifting it up as I go through it. And I'm always going past the center of the bottom. The hardest part of turning a cove is getting them to meet kind of in the middle, so they're even. So I like to go past the center. And fade out of it. So that's a hard trick to kind of learn, is fading out of a cut. So the more practice you do, that's the better you're going to get at it. Okay, so we've got sunken in bead, raised bead, cove. I'm just going to go ahead and finish this out. A little more shape at the top. You can also be more tip dominant and get a pretty smooth surface on most woods, but some woods, when you ride the bevel with the tip of the tool, it's going to give you issues and not always be a great surface. But you have to remember those core fundamentals of feeding your tool slowly. Okay. Call that good. I messed up on the raised bead. I kind of chipped out my raised bead, but oh well. We're going to move on. I'm going to pass this around and move to the skew and just kind of show some core principles with that. There you go. Anybody got any questions before I move to the skew? Yeah.
Pressing down on the tool rest real hard.
Yeah. Yeah, probably more so with the spindle gouge and the bowl gouge. I press down and pinch more so than I do with the spindle roughing gouge. And then the skew, I kind of grab that on top. I typically use this grip, and I'm pinching that with my pinky and ring finger as well. And the skew is trickier because you can't always get a good control of it. It always wants to push back every direction you're going, so you're always fighting against the skew, kind of. But it's a dance, sort of. It's hard to explain, but fighting back into it, it's like kind of an equilibrium, trying to find it and being at the right angle too.
For a lot of your skews around.
Pretty much, yeah. I used to have more of a radius on it, but that's kind of just how it comes out when I sharpen it. It's not always intentional. All right. So I'll knock the corners off, make this round with the skew. If I was doing this like legit, this is what I was turning in the shop, I would probably use the skew to knock the corners off here. It works a little bit better than the spindle roughing gouge just because this is such a soft wood. Okay, so with the skew, you're using a lot of relief cuts, especially with the long point. Pretty much every cut is set up by a relief cut. And using the long point, like I said, predominantly to make those, and that's where this tool really shines, is because it can make a relief cut so deeply and cleanly. So doing a sunken in bead here. The hardest part with the skew is controlling it as you're rolling it, because it likes to change directions on you and catch if it'll let you know, obviously, or if you're at the wrong angle. Let's see how that turned out. So this is the tool I would prefer to use on soft pine like this, because using it correctly can give you a super smooth finish and less tear out. So that was a sunken in bead. Doing a raised bead, same principles. Make your relief cut. Use the short point, the bottom half of the skew, to plane into that relief cut. And I'm still always working downhill. So this might be flat, but after my initial cut, I've got it downhill now. So I don't want to work my way back up. I want to start at the top. And another important thing to note with the skew is, as you're making a cut, you're kind of changing where the cut is being made. So when I start this cut, I'm kind of in the middle of the skew. And then as I move down, I transfer more to the very bottom so I can get a nice sharp line at the bottom. So watch where the shavings come off here. And then I like to hold it there at the bottom, and it kind of switches to scraping just to get it nice and clean and all the excess removed at the bottom. So that's how I would set up my raised bead and then roll the corners of it over. You can mark the middle if you want for a little reminder not to pass that point. Nice and slow. Don't want to rush any of these cuts. Every finished cut needs to be done slowly. Okay, so here I went a little deeper on the side, so I'll have to switch to a long point for more access. Okay.
Tool rest height.
I left it at about center, but you probably should go up a little higher when you're planing with the skew there. Okay, so I'm happy with that raised bead. This right side is a little higher than the left side, but sometimes that is okay depending on what you're going for. So let's talk about a cove with the skew. Making a cove, this is not always something you're going to want to try, but just to see that it's kind of doable, I guess. I would lay out the sides and then kind of make my depth with the long point in the middle. Okay, so now I've got just my depth marked. I'm going to kind of work on the shoulders now. Get both of those nice and clean. Turn my speed up, and then I'm working with the short point and rotating, kind of swooping down into the middle as I go down there. I'm going to mark my shoulder. Okay, you get to that point, and it's kind of like, why am I using the skew for this? It's not the right tool for the job. This is where I think, yeah, that's where you mess up. That's where I think that the radius on the skew helps you, because it kind of allows you to get in there a little bit better. All right, so no mistakes, only happy accidents. Just fix your shape a little bit. And that's why Steve Jones, this production turner I was talking about, that's why he's so good at this technique and this stuff, is because he makes like ballisters and production items in England. So he's copying. He's always trying to get the exact same shape. Here I just made a mistake and I had to change the shape a little bit. You wouldn't be able to do that if you were doing copy work. So repetition, that's where his skill comes from for sure. You can switch to the long point. Sometimes that helps me a little bit if I'm ever trying to do this. And then the middle is the tough part to get taken care of. But for a demo, we'll call that good. And then just clean up some of my areas to make it look finished. So with that one, you're going to be able to see that my flats and my beads are much cleaner than this cove I tried. All right, so I'll pass that one around, and I think I should have enough time just to go over a bowl, kind of how I would make that nice and clean.
Were you raising the back of the tool?
Yep, yeah, pretty much on every cut you're making, as you go into the wood with the skew, you're raising the back of the tool. Sometimes it's much more than other times, but it just depends how far you're going into the wood. Thanks.
Practicing with my skew and I gave up on it.
Yeah, it's easy to give up on it.
I'll come back to it, but
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're learning, it's really beneficial to get a super good grasp on spindle roughing gouge and then spindle gouge and bowl gouge before you move on to the skew. You can use a skew for scraping and trying to get your long point in there for making shapes and scraping, but when you're trying to roll beads and plane with it, it gets trickier there. But if you want to just plane flat things, that's what you should start on, is planing flat surfaces, not doing coves or trying to roll it. You're trying to keep it stationary and just getting the feel for the angle. And then you can move into more relief cuts and coves and different things like that.
Do you like the skew that's got the round
The radius on the skew,
side? Yeah. Well,
or like a skew that, sometimes they make oval skews too.
you know,
Yeah, so I've never used one, but it looks interesting. If you know who Dave Dalby is on Instagram, he only uses a oval skew, and he's really good at it. If you want to see more of what the oval skew, Dave Dalby. Okay, same type of wood, piece of pine. Got a few of them. Let's see which one's better. And I use a screw chuck to hold this. I like the one-way screw chuck the best. If you like mounting your work with a screw chuck, it has kind of the strongest threads and the deepest threads, I would say. And when you're working with such a soft wood like pine, you want to drill probably a smaller diameter hole than what you would with a harder wood. Because if it's a harder wood, cherry maple, walnut, or anything like that, you're never going to get it off if I drilled this size of a hole. But with pine, I should be able to screw it on there and have those threads dig nicely into it. Sometimes people use spacers with their screw chucks, so you don't have to use all the threads. That would be a good idea probably here. But when you're using one of these, always make sure it's nice and seated. You don't want to crank as hard as you can because you might strip it out. But make sure it's nice and seated against your jaws. Okay, what I really want to stress on here is grain direction. So this is kind of a classic example of showing grain direction, but it should hit home with everyone. It seems like a simple concept, grain orientation, face grain, end grain, edge grain. But when you get into crazy weird shapes of wood and not necessarily burls because their grain's going everywhere, but when you have straight grain but even different shapes, it can get confusing on what is the face grain, what is the edge grain, what is the end grain. So typically when I'm roughing out a bowl, I want to always rough out through the face grain. I don't want to come down into the end grain and the edge grain. The wood wants to be removed through the side grain. Just an example of that. If you cut on the edge grain here, you see how it's cutting with the grain basically. It gives you nice smooth shavings. If you move to the end grain, it's much harder. You can get it done, but that's not how the wood is meant to be removed. Same example you can show with the turning tools. If I just turn this hand, you can see how that would make nice big curls cutting through the side grain. If I try to cut through the end grain, it's not round right now, but it's not going to want to cut. So pretty classic example of how to show that, but I'll show you now with the lathe spinning. If I try to come in from the top here, you can do it. It's going to take longer. I'm going to try to leave a smooth surface here, but we'll see what happens. So shaping the outside of the bowl. With pine, sometimes you're not going to get huge shavings because of how soft it is. But your shavings do kind of tell the story of how the wood is being cut. If you're getting nice big long shavings, continuous, that's coming through the side grain, that's being cut the way it wants to. If you're getting small little powder, typically that means you're scraping it and it's not being cut the best way possible. So I've got tear out. I was cutting through that end grain. That's not the way the wood wants to be cut. So I'm going to move my tool rest over a little more so I can focus more on this face grain, rotate it so I'm not hitting it, and get my stuff out of the way a little bit. Speed's at about 1,000, 1,200. And I'm going to work with the other wing now. Instead of the right wing, I'm switching to the left. And like your question before, if I ever switched hands, this is where you would kind of change your body position to do the outside of a bowl and put your right hand forward so you can be more open and kind of away from the piece. But I typically keep my left hand forward. So I'm just trying to get it round here. Cutting through that side grain. I didn't want to go all the way because then I'd probably be too far off the tool rest. I want to get that far and reposition my tool rest. So now I'll take small cuts and try to go slowly through the exit so I don't blow out the back of it with splinters. Should be round. So as you can see, that was a roughing cut. So I wasn't going slow. I wasn't trying to make it smooth. But the end grain fibers right here are nice and pulled out. Side grain, decently smooth. And that is what you'll see more of if you try to go from the top and try to cut end grain. So now that it's round, I probably can get away with coming in from the top. But that's still not the way I want to do it because it's cutting the end grain. So let's look at it. Similar tear out. It's just going to be hard to get rid of that. So a technique I would use to get rid of that, at this point I'd probably cut the tenon for my bowl. So then I have the bottom kind of defined and then round out that bottom. Okay, so now I've got the shape good. I'm going to raise my tool rest, and like I said before, I like to use the wing of the gouges to get a nice finished cut. So I raised up my tool rest. I'm going to drop the bottom of the handle quite a bit and see where the shavings come off here. Now they're coming off mostly on the wing. Long, wispy shavings. Still got to go nice and slow through it. I kind of sped up halfway through. So let's take one more cut. And it's okay if you lose the cut. A skill that you'll get better at the more you do it is picking that back up without any trace being shown. So you want to be able to pick it back up in the exact same spot so you can't see it. Okay, let's take a look at that, see how the surface came out. So now we've got it nice and smooth, even the end grain didn't tear out. That's what we're looking for. At the bottom here, the tenon, the end grain did tear out because I didn't really focus on that yet. I'm just gonna change my direction to clean up the top of it. And then maybe clean up that tenon a little bit. Here I would use more of the tip. And just go really slow. If you want to clean up the bottom, here is where you would go in from the end grain, the top. And I would just try to take a nice, very light cut. I do that because that's a little more controllable. If I tried to use the wing, that's more of a scrape. Because it's so flat, I have to scrape it. So come in from the top. Okay, decent. I got a little tear out in the bottom, but we'll leave that be. Okay, how we doing? Okay, I think we'll call that good. I'm not going to do the inside of it because I don't really have the right. I would use a typical bowl gouge to do the inside of the wings, and then a bottom feeder Irish grind bowl gouge to do the bottom. I didn't bring that, so I'm not going to do the inside, but I think I'm going to call that good. If anybody has any questions, feel free to shout them out. Otherwise, I think I'm done. Nope. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.